Fantastic to be here today. I'm not going to do a mihi because we're running out of time, so we'll go rather fast. I've learned so much today. We all have. This project has been just fantastic, working with Pia and a wide number of people up here. I wanted to introduce my two colleagues. So I'm Susie Kerr. I'm a senior fellow at Motu. I've been working on carbon since somewhere in the 1990s. So I should know a little bit about it, but I've forgotten more than I remember. Sophie, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Kia ora, I'm Sophie. I work at Motu as well, along with Susie, and I work closely with Pia in a project that we're about to tell you about called Wado. And yeah, I'll save the rest for the slides.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Sam from New York City, and I'm working as an intern at Motu. I worked on sort of a mapping tool for landowners to use to see how eligible their land could be for funding. Cool. Yes. Basically, for funding eligibility, land funding eligibility for the ETS, the sort of minimum basic requirement is that the land cannot have been forested in 1990. So this is land that's being reforested or to sequester carbon. It was already gone over sort of other requirements, and so yeah. The ECFP, the Erosion Control Funding Program, this is basically really steep erosion-prone land, and that was talked about as like this sort of 3A target land, or classified as 6E, 7E, or 8E. But yeah, that's just basically, that means that's like really steep, and sort of it's either pasture or there's sort of nothing on it. And to submit grants for this, the total area of the land must be greater than 5 hectares, and no individual patch can be smaller than 1 hectare. So something to keep in mind when submitting proposals for it. There cannot have been existing tree cover on the land since 1989. So something to keep in mind is that ECFP, or the Gisborne Erosion Control Funding Program eligible land, is sort of a subset of the ETS eligible land, emissions trading scheme. So you can, pretty much all land that's eligible for ECFP is going to also be eligible for the ETS, but not vice versa. No, I was just talking about sort of, this is like all land. So like 3A would be sort of, that's eligible for the ECFP would be in here, and that's definitely going to be eligible for both, because that's target land for the ECFP, and that also could be target land for reforesting, growing trees on. And yeah. Yep. So to make this map, I used a couple sort of major data sources that provided me with information. The Māori Land Spatial Data Set was published by the Ministry of Justice and Ministry for MPI on behalf of the Māori Land Court, and it's accessed. I found it on Māori Land Court online, and it's basically a data set that sort of contains information detailing all the blocks of Māori-owned land in New Zealand. And the LUCAS, or Land Use Cover Survey data set, was used to, published by the MFE, was used as a historical data set to look at what the land cover looked like in 1990, to determine that the eligibility, as well as the classifications for whether it's like erosion prone or not, to determine ECFP eligibility. And I also used some reference data from the LINS data set. Yeah, so to make the map, I just did like a intersect on the ETS eligible land layer with the Māori owned land layer. So that's sort of just, yeah, combining those two layers to make it into one, and then intersected that with the 6E, 7E, and 80 land layer and like that target overlay land to create the ECFP eligible land layer. And yeah, so this is sort of the final product, working product that we've come up with. So if you see here, this is the Gisborne Tarafiti district, and the orange is eligible for both funding programs, likely eligible for both funding programs, yeah, and the yellow is likely eligible for the ETS and not the ECFP, and then the green is land that's was forest in 1990 and likely not eligible for either funding program. Māori owned, yeah.
Do you have the capability to actually map that information, map that data, or do you rely on?
This is.
Yes, no, I know that, but I'm asking whether or not you have the capability to actually do the map yourself.
I did this map.
Oh, very good. So
yeah.
you don't need to rely on MPI or whoever else for their information.
No, I made the map,
Good.
yeah.
So does that mean that the application fee, you don't need to pay it?
No, it doesn't, because this is not officially acceptable by MPI. So
Okay.
when Sam says this is likely to be eligible,
Right.
this is not exactly what MPI will use. They don't have a map. They do it manually, so we can't replicate it.
MPI looks at aerial photos that weren't suitable for making a map of this type, and they have like various scattered things, so they'd look at it as a case-by-case basis. Yeah, so this is a specific block of land, right, on the river, right in Ruatoria. The title is Section 6 and Section 7, Block 12, Mangaporo Survey District, and it's the management name of it is the proprietors of Roto Kautuku X1C, and yeah, so I was able to calculate that this block of land likely has 335.58 hectares of ECFP and ETS eligible land, 72.34 hectares of ETS but not ECFP eligible land, and 85.03 hectares of land that's ineligible for funding. That's likely, and we will hopefully be able to get this map on the Wara Project website and be able to so it'll be able to be looked at by landowners, and then people can search in their block of land and then figure out exactly how much of it is, and which areas and how much land is eligible for these funding programs.
Pia, is that tutu okura or tutu mata? Tutu mata.
So yeah, the idea for this map, just to extend this, so this is this particular block. The idea is that the owners of this block can zoom in. We'll have the map on the website. You can zoom in and you can have a look to see whether this is worth thinking about. Is this something that might be really valuable for your land? And you'll be able to use the data in some form. We'll get it so you can actually say, this is about how much it's worth. Okay? We're going to put it on the Waro website. Yeah. So that, no, because he only finished it yesterday, the day before. What now? Yeah. So then, once you've looked at that map and you've decided you're interested and you've gone through a process, maybe the sort of thing that Leo is talking about, and your group has decided you really would like native forest on your land, then if your land is eligible, then you can choose to participate. The process of registration is a bit of a headache, but there are brokers. There are a couple of local brokers who can help you, and and people like Nikki know how to go through that process. And then, so this is something you can register at any time. Then once your land has forest, you can start to receive the credits. You can apply for them every year if you want to get your credits every year, or you have to put in a form every 5 years to get those credits. And the reason that you get credits is that those trees are taking carbon dioxide out of the air, and that's really valuable to other people. So you're being paid because you're providing a useful service. So forest is a definition. So forest, you have to have 30% canopy cover, and the species on your land have to be capable of reaching 5 metres. So it can't be gorse or just gorse, it would have to have other species in there as well. Okay. So once you have gone through this process, once you think your land actually has forest on it, you can see that there's enough coverage of your land, then a broker also can help you with the process of actually claiming those credits. Yeah. You need to claim the credits every 5 years, but you don't have to sell the credits. You can hold on to them in the way that Nikki did. If the price doesn't look good, or you're nervous about them, or other people in your block are nervous about this process, you claim them and you hold on to them until you decide what to do. And you can hold on to them indefinitely. They don't go away. So there are different ways that you can sell your credits. So one option is that you just go to a broker. So you go to the broker maybe that Nikki has used, and they will just buy it. There'll be a price online that you can sell them for. The second option is that you could work, again in a similar way to Nikki, you could work even before you enter the ETS. You might be able to sign up an agreement with somebody who wants to buy those units from you long term, but they may be willing to give you cash up front in anticipation that they will get units from you later on. Or they might sign up and say, we will buy the units from you for the next 10 years or the next 15 years at a given price or at some prices that you agree, so that you get a bit more certainty about how much income you're going to get out of those. And those things, you can negotiate what sort of agreement that's going to look like, and that will be negotiated with the different emitters potentially. If you do sell your credits, there is an implication of that, and this is something that people need to be a little careful of. You want to go into this native forest system and sell your credits if you actually want native forest on your land. So you're planning to do what Nikki is doing, where you're going to leave your native forest there. Because if you claim those credits and sell them, and then later you decide you want to clear that land again, you're going to have to pay back. You're going to have to buy credits and then repay them. So that's why it's really important that people think clearly about what they're wanting to do with this land first. This is really valuable if you have lots of other reasons why you'd like to have natives on your land, sort of in a similar way to what you guys are doing. You want the natives anyway. This is just an extra stream of revenue that can help you pay for the fencing or the pest control or whatever. Okay.
So as Pia kind of mentioned before, part of the role for this project we're talking about from the Motu end is engaging with these companies that are emitters, that have an obligation to buy carbon every year. So what I've done recently is interviewed a lot of these large emitters to try understand how they're thinking about this process as well, so we can try find a way to match this up with the ideals and the hopes for the landowners. And one of the first points, so these slides are all quotes, direct quotes from my interviews, and the first point to mention is that these emitters really are keen to engage. They really want to, but sometimes it's complicated to quite know how. But here they've said, when I think about the deals we've done, they have largely been because we care about the relationship. So I think you do need to have people who within the organisations want a relationship and are prepared to invest some time and energy in getting transactions completed. So that's kind of been a theme throughout today, that it's important that we can work together and build relationships and connections. I talked to them a lot about the sort of deals that they would be willing to to make with landowners who are entering into forestry. And some of them are willing to do small deals. So one has said that if someone came to them and said, I've got 5,000 credits, would you be interested? We would say yes. And they talked further about how they felt like that was the right thing to do, because this is an area where we don't have a huge amount of certainty and understanding across the board. So if we can use this as a way to build that understanding and that knowledge, then and grow that confidence in the system, then it's beneficial for everyone. However, this wasn't an opinion that was shared by everyone I talked to, and all of them, even the ones that said they would be willing to do small deals, all would prefer blocks of land to be aggregated. So they would prefer, because of administration costs and otherwise, they would prefer to have fewer, larger contracts.
What is a small block and what is a large block?
It's a good question. It depends who you ask. So one of them said that they had some deals for 5,000 credits and some for 100,000 credits.
Right.
So there's quite a scale. There's quite a scale.
Yeah, but you'd need to marry the two.
Absolutely.
So someone else is putting it together collectively, or maybe
Yeah, if we could go back a slide.
So is this why you're looking for 8 partners within your model? Oh, 12, sorry, yeah. Okay. But is it necessary to have 12? Why can't we just have one? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So more to
different starting contexts. So one, so Tōtara Nui, that block they've identified, they've got to go through Timu Whairoa to get all their decision making through.
Yeah.
A Māori incorporation, there's more scope, you'd think.
Yeah, they can make an outright decision.
Yeah.
And so no, my question is, why do you want different types of management?
so more to
Is
we're
it
not
part of the research or something?
Yes.
And is that to find out how they reach their decision, or?
I've suggested that to the Motu team to look at different, not just one of each kind.
Okay.
Because our starting lines are all different.
Yeah.
And when you start, that's why, when you start to get close to those decisions, like, Nikki, like they had to forego some of their farming land. Do they have the finance to do that? No, so they did a third party contract with Gravemoors to help.
Okay, so then you hypothetically could have like Tutu or Kura, whatever, and then you could have, say, Ahikoka.
Yeah.
No, never mind, too much rari. Like say Ahikoka block, and mix it all up so your quantum can be any quantum. You just need 12 blocks of varying management structures or governance structures. Oh, sweet.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily have to be with your model, though, does it? Of 12.
No, she still
could go
wants 12.
alone by ourselves.
Yeah, so that's for our research.
Right.
We're
That's for
looking
the
for 12,
research.
but each of those blocks could possibly sell to a different emitter with a different contract. Right, and they could choose a range, and even though they say that they don't want to do small deals, for the sake of the project, they are probably willing to try out something small as well. So there's we have a little bit of leverage with those emitters to say, can you please offer something, so that we can actually talk that through. Just because we want to have more examples to understand how they might actually work.
Yeah, Susie, I do remember when, you know, I mean, I think one of the things that was a barrier for my committee was that it was always, oh, well, who are you going to sell to? You know, and I did have to explain that it was actually quite a mission to find the emitters in those earlier times, because they'd say, how many units have you got? And I'd say 5,000. I had 8, right? Oh, no, no. Can you get some others up for you? You know, so that we can buy, we want to buy 20,000 or we want to buy 60,000, whatever. And so, yeah, in those early days, you know, I was sort of the only one out there, so it was a bit of a trial to find an emitter. You know, it may sound odd to you, but it was.
Yeah, no, that's like...
It was hard that, you know, I think, here I am hanging on to all these credits and I can't find anyone to buy them. You know, so
Should be getting easier now.
well, it is now, but I'm just saying to you that, you know, in those days there was even a perception that, oh, well, we'll wait to see what the government, because remember the government also was subsidising these emitters. So you had all that going, that was the climate that I was working in. Now they're in the real world, which is, you know, every unit is rather expensive. And they better
You
just
were a
pay for it.
pioneer, Nikki.
You know about that.
Yeah.
Probably was. Now I look back on it. Jamieson was right here. That's why I just don't mind.
Thank you all. So yeah, from these interviews that I conducted, this theme came through of emphasising this opportunity for someone to play that role as an aggregator and really emphasise the value of a broker, and not just, and that role was multifaceted and that they could really contribute in a lot of ways. So here one of the emitters said, the broker basically did everything. He was the counterparty's agent. I wouldn't want to cut a long-term deal with landowners if they didn't have sufficient advice. So having the broker there made things quicker, and it meant that we both knew that he knew what he was talking about. So really building that trust and confidence, and everyone knows what they're signing up for when they're moving forwards.
That was part of the success of
You had a broker.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm on the phone to Brian all the time.
Ka pai, Nikki. Did well.
And as Susie mentioned before, there are multiple options for contracts, and so how this might look like. It could be that the emitter invests capital up front, so they fund that fencing and the planting and things you need to do to move forwards in this process. Or the other option is that they...
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yes.
About the well, whoever's buying it, they're going to fund the fencing costs.
Correct.
Sorry, who are you immediately can fund the fencing costs?
So perhaps the large company who wants to buy the credits.
Oh.
So there, well, as we can see from the quotes, there's an alternative that you have a capital intensive one where you make a direct investment up front, so they would pay for the conversion to native, so they're actually acting more as an investor than a buyer.
Right.
So there are multiple contract options, and that's something that came through in my interviews as well, that these companies would be open to different sorts of contracts, so there's not just one fixed way of doing it.
What I did is I sent them a photo that I knew that Emotively would draw them in their marketing, because, you know, they wanted to identify this land that they were helping at $2 extra, because remember they're paying $2 extra on every unit than what the market was. And I said to them, look, this is what you'll be helping, because Kiwi, this is our land, this is our ancestral land. I went through that story with them. All on the phone, I might add. I didn't even go to visit them. I didn't visit them until after we'd done the deal. But they bought it because they could see that they were advertising, they'd used, this was New Zealand. This was proper New Zealand. This wasn't, you know, this wasn't just sort of a story made up. This was the real story. And they were ready to pay that extra premium to advertise that story.
So the third part of the presentation is a tool that Sophie has been developing, so that a landowner could go to the website, they look at Sam's map, They decide it looks potentially interesting, but now they want to know how much the value of this might be. How much resource could they actually get by doing this? So we're creating a sort of a calculator. Again, this is completely indicative values. So this is not a financial planning tool. It shouldn't replace that sort of careful thought later, but it gives you some idea of whether this is an option you should think about. So take an example of a hectare of bare pasture land that is eligible for both the Erosion Control Funding Program and the emissions trading system. So we're going to make some assumptions that the emissions trading system price is $25, which is what it is currently, and that it's going to grow over time. You can change these if you have your own idea what you think might happen. We're looking at a situation where there's 1 hectare here, hectares of ETS and ECFP eligible 1. We're going to assume something about the costs of actually establishing that in native forest, so we put in 2,500. That would vary depending on your land and what exactly your fencing needs are, or if you want to actually plant manuka or not. That would be partly offset in this case by the $1,500 of Erosion Control Funding Program money, so that takes it down. And then, so what does this look like in terms of outputs? So over 20 years, if you were willing to sign a contract with someone for 20 years and sell all of your units to them, they would be willing to offer you something like this much for your hectare for the 20 years of units. So they might be willing to pay that much right now. So that basically means that you covered all the costs if those assumptions were correct. And just for a sort of a comparison, this situation would essentially give you an annual flow of income off the land over the 20 years of $68. So you can sort of compare that to what you might be getting off the land currently by running some stock on it. That gives you some idea. And of course, this then keeps going past the 20 years that it will continue to generate units. So an alternative piece of land, what if you've got a bit of land that already has a lot of Kānaka regeneration on it? It's already 10 years old, but it is ETS eligible. In that case, you don't get this ECFP grant because it's already got forest cover on it, but you can get the ETS credit, and you get more of it because your trees are already established. You've got canopy cover over most of it, and so they're growing faster, and so you're going to get your credits faster. So you actually end up being offered more money for those credits. For 20 years of credits, you might be offered $4,000. So that might allow you to do a significant amount of fencing. Or this is equal to a sort of standard flow of income of about $125 a year, indefinitely going forward. But if you take this and you sell these, you sign this contract, or you just sell them as you get them, and then later you decide actually you didn't want to have forest on that land, you want to turn it back into pasture, after 20 years, you're going to have to spend nearly $12,000 to buy back those credits. So you want to think about that in advance. You don't want to commit your land to natives thinking that you might then go back out again and sell the units. You could go in, claim the units and hold on to them until you're really sure that you're never going to clear that land and that you really do want it in natives. And then you've sort of got the chance to sell the units if you want to, but if you're still unsure, if you're risk averse, you just hold on to them for a while longer. So the block that Sam showed on the map, that had these amounts of different sorts of land. So we put in the different amounts of the two sorts of land into the calculator. We've kept these assumptions the same, but depending on your land, you could get it or not. So that's a per hectare basis, and that is only available for some of the land. So that gives you $1.2 million up front if you sold 20 years worth, or an annual flow of income of $7,600. So it's just to give you some idea of the scale of resources that could be available. We've assumed that this block took all of that land and put it all into native forest. Okay. And so this will all be available on this site, which we're just gradually trying to populate with more materials.
Relative to, I'm just curious, relative to the rest of the country, does Te Pai Rāwhiti have potential to be would you say major carbon credit players in the New Zealand ETS economy?
Not major.
Who are the major?
Planting overall is actually not a major part of our reduction effort. It's significant, but the real reductions are changes in transport behaviour and electricity and other things.
Yeah.
So it's worth keeping these in context. Out of that though, most of the planting opportunities are in the North Island, and quite a lot of the native restoration, which would be on the more marginal land, is in Māori land or in the sort of central North Island and Tairāwhiti. I haven't done the numbers, but yeah, I know there's a lot of opportunity on what NPI described as hard hill country.
Yes.
Yeah, that's where a lot of the potential
Which sounds
is.
very much like us, all those things.
Yeah, I think actually that's beef and lamb, that's what they call it, North Island hard hill country.
Yeah, have you done any sort of financial modelling comparing ETS against the standard forest right arrangement for trees?
So relative to pine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if you can do pine, you're going to make more money out of pine. You're going to make a lot more carbon credits value out of pine. So you do this because you want native. If you're just wanting to make money and you don't care about that other things, pine is going to make you more money. It may not make you timber money, but even just with carbon, it will make you more money because the pine trees just grow faster.
What I want to do is actually come to a decision as to my options going forward.
Right.
Okay? And so now, personally, I own two types of woodlots. One is owned by myself alone, and that is under a forest right with Ngāti Porou Forests and Ansell. Another one, I'm the chairman of Uruaki Station, and that block will be harvested in about 3 years' time. It already qualifies for carbon credits. We have not uplifted the carbon credits because I've been too bloody scared, because I didn't have a valid use myself for the use of the revenue, but I do have now, and so I'm looking to trade those credits, okay, and we'll be deciding on that very, very soon. Okay. Now, in the first instance, my own woodlot, okay, that's under a forest right with Whanui Forests and Ansell. Now, they leased my carbon credits out to a partner. Right? Now, that lease actually gets me, as the owner, around any obligation to repay the carbon credits. So you know, apart from Nikki's sort of method of having a permanent forest sink, you know, that's fine. But that's the other way to get around having to take away your liability. Right? Now, for the other forest lot, when we go to harvest after 4 years' time, we're going to make decisions soon as to what is it that we're going to do next.
Yeah.
Right? And so we're wanting to consider carbon in the arrangement. Right? Now, we've already got the carbon credits. Right? So we're going to start trading on those as soon as possible.
So you need to be careful.
Right.
Because if you have, I own a forest, I'm guessing that your trees were planted in the early 90s,
Yes.
like everybody else. I own a block exactly like that.
Yeah.
And I'm in the process of beginning to harvest. if I were in the ETS and I sold my credits, when I harvested, I would have to go and buy some and pay them back.
Right.
And you would have to give away, when you harvest your pine, you will have to give back probably every single credit that you received, because your trees were already quite old when the emissions trading system started.
Okay, yeah.
So
Now
don't
that's going to help me with my...
think hard about selling. You can lease them, because then they'll give them back to you, and you use those to meet your liability when you cut. And then when you start a new cycle, you're in the same cycle.
Doesn't your first cycle expire though, terminate after harvesting?
After harvesting, you pay back
Yeah,
all your
but
units.
let's say I haven't used
Yeah.
it. So does it wind up?
Well, you're still, if you're still in the ETS, when your trees start growing again, after a little while, you'll start getting credits again. So on
In
your
the
second
second
rotation,
rotation?
yes, because
Oh.
you got them on your first rotation, you give them back,
Yeah,
and
but
then
I
you
haven't
get them
used
again. Yeah, and then you'll get them again,
Okay.
right? And you can lease them out again, and then you'll have to give them back when you harvest again.
Okay.
Right? If you went into natives and you start to get them,
Right.
and you decide you would stay in natives forever, instead of leasing them out, and you don't make a lot of money off a lease, you would instead be able to sell those units,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Because you're never going to actually be cutting, and you will never have to pay back. Yeah. But you won't get, on a piece of land that already has pine, you're not going to get credits. After harvest, you won't get any credits for a number of years. The real gain is on people, for natives, is on people who are planting now, not people who planted like we did back in the early 90s.
Yeah. So for us, our big decision then is whether or not we should just replant, which is a condition of our existing forest right. The block must be replanted, right? And so just treat it without ETS going forward, because, all right, or else we go again, but in the second rotation go through ETS. Understand?
If you go through ETS and you lease it again, the same thing you did last time, you can do that again.
Right.
And there's no liability, and you
Yeah.
get a stream of income. It's not big, but there's a stream of income for
Good.
you.
All right. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yes. Yes. Although, actually, can I just say,
Yes.
at the moment, they're reviewing a lot of these rules. So before you make your decision,
Yes.
yeah, it's not clear what the new rule, actually nobody knows what the new rule is going to be for people like you and me who have existing forests that are in. It may be a simpler rule, but it's not clear what it's going to be yet. So, in fact, I think they're consulting on what they think it might be. It's a bit it's a messy space.
Yeah.
So, so the rules I defined are the rules that hold now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Developed around reversion and the trees that are growing through reversion and how quickly they sink carbon. So what I'm saying is, so my thinking is this. So the current science says that pine trees sinks carbon way quicker than any other tree. It's the super carbon sinker. Now, what I'm saying, and I've probably said this to you years ago, Jason, I believe that there is a native species that sinks carbon quickly, but we don't know which species it is.
Well,
Now, is there
Yeah.
science occurring now
There's
that
some.
is investigating that? And or these other sites that are reverting on Māori land, is there science around them to study the different species and how quickly they're sinking carbon? Because we know that compared to pine, that Manuka and Kanuka is slow growing compared, but there might be another species such as tutu or koru or something else that actually grows quite fast.
Yeah, so Manuka and Kānaka actually go quite fast relative to the Puriri, Totara,
Yeah.
those ones, and there is a small amount of research, and yes, they do grow, and in the long term, they actually get as much as pine does if you're
Yeah.
growing and cutting, sort of the average, but it takes quite a long time for them to get to that point. And there's not a lot of data on that, but it's positive. But actually, the Manuka and Kānaka sequester much faster than those trees in the short term. So,
Which trees?
than Totara,
Then the
Ringmu.
hardwoods, yes,
Yeah.
so just moving away from the hardwoods.
There's not a
to
lot of carbon in it. You probably know this. Yeah.
And not a
You're
lot
not
of
gonna
carbon
get-
in what the other trees.
No. The carbon is in the trees that are like this.
Okay, so basically, the amount of carbon is comparative to the size of the tree.
Basically, it's half the biomass.
Okay,
If you took the tree and weighed it and divide by 2, basically you get carbon.
okey dokes.
Yeah.
But then, I mean,
But one
and I've
is heavy.
spoken with Pia about this as well, is whether or not we could, because at the moment it doesn't take into account the activities surrounding the type of tree. Yeah. So like if it's a pine for harvest, it doesn't take into account, the carbon that it stores doesn't take into account or isn't balanced off by the very emission heavy process around harvesting, transport, and the system that's attached to it.
All of that is already covered in the ETS. If you transport your logs, you're taking them in a truck that is using diesel, that Gull Oil
You get
provided.
less carbon credits for it.
And they had to buy the carbon credits.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of that is already charged for. What it doesn't take into account is the effect on water quality.
And that's what
or
I was
the
just going to
value of
say is
biodiversity,
because you
or-
could balance that out across pine not being harvested or whatever, but the other part of that also is the system, the ecological system benefits that feed into climate change, like water quality,
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff, ocean productivity that's
biodiversity,
impacted by your land
cultural
use,
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Those things
So
have to
those
be considered
values-
alongside.
Yeah.
And so you may choose to go to natives,
Yeah.
even though it's not the most financially profitable or
Okay.
it's not the most carbon.
So my next thing is this, given that we understand that now, within the scope of your program, can you measure and rate the values, those other values that are attached to reversion or growing native trees, the other values on top of the carbon and economic value of the carbon, so the other values such as the biodiversity habitat value, the medicinal value, the cultural resources value, the erosion, the permanency value, are
So,
those things being
Jason's
factored in?
PhD
Well,
did,
Jason's
had a go at
PhD.
that 10 years ago. So that
Let's
was,
go.
that was the
Can you
first
read
go
it?
at overlaying these different values. And we've done some of that work too, just for the water quality and carbon, and those two very much go together. I would love, as this project expands, to work with people like ESR or with you guys who are monitoring this stuff and collect data on the same places, so you can actually add this up together. So we do a whole series. What is the impact on jobs? What is the impact on community over time? And really look at the full impacts, but not within the scope of what PIA is doing.
Like
Yeah,
we
we
put
need
a
to-
cultural values assessment
Yeah,
tool into the mix.
right. Yeah. We're actually designing a project really similar to this in Colombia, where weirdly they have a lot more funding because they're poor. Don't ask me the logic of that, but they do. And trying to actually monitor community outcomes and all sorts of aspects of these programs and really see what impact they're having. And it would be great to be able to try and do something similar here. So we go beyond just telling stories. The stories are great, but it's nice to have data when you're going to talk to government officials.
So what happens if people plant indigenous species and they might plant it on optimum sites, wide space totara that in 60 or 70 years time are mature and you can get out with a helicopter with a bit of disruption? That shouldn't have any effect on the carbon if you were taking out, say, might only be 2 or 3% of the canopy.
Depends on how much. Often a lot of carbon in an old growth forest is actually a small number of peer-to-peer you've got a larger plot there, there's actually direct sampling that you do. At the moment, you don't. You'll do that by satellite.
Damaged trees out, like trees that have been hammered by the storm and they're just gonna rot away.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to take them out and like move it or something?
If your land is about, at the moment under the rules, if your land is greater than 100 hectares, you could do anything you like. It's just, well, within reason. And there are some
Yeah,
rules. But
like
yeah,
they
you could
could
take those
take
out.
those.
Yeah, it just means that there will be less carbon, so you get less payments. And
Even
very
if the
soon.
tree is already dead.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to otherwise just decompose over a period of time, so you don't necessarily have to. And very soon, we're going to be able to measure carbon by an aeroplane flying over. And you can measure carbon by flying an aeroplane over the top.
Yeah.
And measuring it. It's kind of weird technology, but I think within the next 5 or 10 years, that's going to become really common. And then you have choices around how you want to use your land. But you don't have to have a whole set of rules. Like, they'll just come and measure how much carbon you've got. And you won't have to go around and measure every single
I know.
tree. It's all that hassle.
That's costly.
It's very costly, especially if your plot is down a cliff, right?
Exactly.
That LiDAR system that they talked about is what does that. So
Right.
apparently that's going to happen in the Gisborne district.
Yes,
Soon?
it's happening.
They'll
now.
have a LiDAR
Are they
data
doing
set.
carbon? Are they doing carbon?
Well,
Or
I don't
just
know.
doing
They
soil?
said, but they should be able to recover that information if they were thinking about it. You know, I don't know if it's planned for that. I was going to say something about your question, Tui.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for context, keep in mind that New Zealand has had decades of research on Pinus radiata and how to optimize it to grow as quickly as possible and exactly what to expect in different spaces. And there's almost nothing like that about native species. However, I was at a workshop last week with some of the folks who were involved in this Billion Trees program, and they've said there's a small carve out of research money to look at native species and whether they can be, jazzed up a little bit, if they can be more optimally designed to sequester more carbon or put them in the right place or identify genetics or whatever it is. There's some research money for that. So you may want to think about advocating for more money or trying to get that, to be a priority for that group.
There's also research on how to make it cheaper to plant them. Because at the moment, if you're planting in torture, you buy it in a PB3 or something, or you grow it yourself, but it's really, you have to carry these great big heavy things. Whereas a pine, you just take it out of your back pocket, it's super cheap to plant.
Yeah.
So they're doing research on how you can do that with dry root, which will, like Manuka is now much cheaper to plant.
Masters come on there.
They could do the same thing with some
So
of
you-
these other species.
So you could be planting a high proportion of Manuka and then other indigenous species and doing it
Almost.
practically.
Yeah, and fraction, but they can't do it yet, they really can't.
There also seems to be.
What is the per hectare or unit of cost for planting Manuka? Do you know those?
I'm not sure, but it's come right down because those ones that have been planted in the one part, they're producing mass amounts. Now, it's not as cheap as radiata, but it's still quite competitive. So probably two and a half per hectare you've got
That was
probably.
somebody's number.
Well, you've got to take into account too that pest control's more intense than the radiata, and probably your losses might be higher as well. Just natural attrition. Although he's achieved really well down there, but he's had a very good initial couple of seasons.
And it would vary, that would vary with the land. In some places, the carnival comes back really fast on its own, in other places you have to come and control. And we were talking with Doc about, if there were a group of people who wanted to do this, whether they would come in and do pest control in a coordinated way. Because to do pest control on one piece of land, I'm sure you know, is really, really hard work. But if you're doing it over a wider area, you can be much more efficient in how you do it. With or without teammates, I know that's a big issue, but even if you're doing tracking, you can do it more efficiently if you're doing it on a wide scale. Otherwise, you kill yours and then they just will come over the boundary.
They do.
You just scare them from one block to the other.
Exactly.
The other thing too is that planted Manuka, we've been cutting Manuka for so long because it just grows in the presence of stock. We need to make sure we don't fall in the trap that the planted stuff's going to be the same. For some reason, we talk to people like Stuart Hall, goats will come for miles to get it planted. that interested in the natural. That's the Bender's experience with it. Don't just assume that because they're the same species, that the plant and stuff is going to have an easy run through.
Yeah. Hey, is there, I'm just thinking about the amount of riparian land that has been planted and has been lost to the awa, or could be planted and then get lost to the awa. Is there any kind of projecting or understand, you know, I'm just, people trying to make financial forecasts which could then be in an unstable and unpredictable strip of land?
If you plant your forest at 100 metres and then it burns down or blows down or I guess washes away, you're currently still liable for that.
You're liable for that.
You can buy insurance for your carbon, but it's very expensive.
Yeah.
We're not insured.
No, I'm not insured.
That's one of the changes coming is to soften that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the
Who can
proposals,
afford
is that
it?
that would be taken up. So that if the land washed away, or there was a windstorm and it burned down, that would be your responsibility. But maybe if you get someone on the land and they burned it down,
Burned it down,
maybe you
that's
would
the
get some
problem.
responsibility. I don't know how we, but that's much less likely.
So I think what's happened too in Tolaga Bay this winter, it's not only they've lost trees, but they've lost all the topsoil to grow up all the trees. That'll be the twice there.
Flash flood.
Is there any way to better manage that around those 5-year windows with the scenario Gina's just explained? I mean, we can't predict when the floods will be, but it's 5 years to claim credit, that 5-year window. It might be just some building in some inner, you know, an inner buffer is not to sell it until that 5-year window is gone. Is that
In other countries, is that they'll put a whole lot of different bits of land together, and then they sort of self-insure, because it's unlikely all of your land will wash into the river. And so you just hold that certain fraction, thinking that some fraction might blow down or wash away or something, and you just always get some of those rivers. That means you're not getting a view of them, but if you think there's a little risk, that's a way of sort of managing yourself against that.
Yeah, there's a huge risk in
And
it.
of course, if there's a lot of them working together, I'm spreading that out over a much larger group of people. It'd be hard to do that on one person at a time.
Yeah.
Susie, the current review, the ETS, I did hear James Shaw give a speech last weekend at FOMA, and he just very briefly referred to leaving, well, not leaving, but there would not be any decisions made on the review for another year. Is that your...
They don't want to, it's really annoying, they don't want to make the decisions until up until the zero carbon act has been passed, and that's not going to happen until probably August, September next year. For good reasons of trying to get agreement across parties, but it's putting this whole testing back, which I think is a real problem. But there might begin to be some clarity on things like this rule for what happens to people with pine.
I know.
Yeah.
There's not
Existing
even a
forests.
proposal out there yet, whereas with the other stuff, there's some certainty about which way it will go. But, and the price is going to continue to be uncertain,
Yeah.
because, there's still some really fundamental stuff left behind. But, if you hurry processes, sometimes that actually kills them. So, we just have to be patient. You hurried last time.
And it happened.
Can you take me through those 1 hectare numbers that you did again, please?
So this is the first one, this is your bare pasture, and it's going against the erosion control funding program and ETS, and we've assumed this is this, sort of was based on a market planting number, 2,500, and you get that funding. Next slide. So then this is how much you get per hectare. So if you went to New Zealand and they offered you to buy your credits up front at current prices with that expectation, then they will be willing to pay you that much
Right.
for the 20 years. You get that cash in the bank If you put that money, instead of the amount you had to spend to get there, in the bank, that's how much money it would keep providing you forever. So essentially, it's almost putting that money in the bank, and that's sort of how much you get. So it's not huge. You're not going to get rich off this, but if you add this over a number of hectares, it really adds up.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And there's a lot of land up here now that is just not collecting its money. And that makes the government look happy, but it's kind of, it's not good for the region.
So, dollar-wise, is this a good scheme or not? For the landowner?
Depends on what you want to do.
So if you can get other incomes like
So when does
Manuka
it
honey for a certain amount of time, or you have areas that you keep in Manuka adjoining this, it's a huge advantage.
It could be, yeah. And for parts of your land where it's steep and if you can get money, and maybe get some carnival oil, maybe it makes your land more attractive and you can attract some of the tourists that, to come and stay in your place occasionally. It could be really worthwhile. But if you have really good flat fertile land, this is probably not a good choice. So you want to think about what you want.
So give us a scenario, please, or an example of the type of land, etc., that would be ideal for this.
Well, this depends on what you want, right?
Well, let's say your land is
Are you thinking economically or are you thinking culturally?
Steve,
let's just start with economically.
Okay, so just economically, at the moment, I would do natives just on places that are quite steep and not very accessible to roads. Because forests won't work there. You can't do
That's
vegetation forestry.
yeah.
So that would be your first target.
Okay.
And then the nearer hills, if you just want money, you put in Pinus radiata. And then the sloping stuff, maybe you put in the avocados and stuff.
And then on a lot of your easier country, you've got the versatility of a range of incomes.
You can do it.
So you could, if you've got a property with a whole range of land classes on it, and you want to go try and get to be carbon neutral, you get it to go for that inaccessible, harder country to get carbon. And that,
Yeah, people talk about going carbon neutral, but carbon neutral is a global
Huge.
phenomenon. You don't have to be carbon neutral on your land. If you can produce, if it's sensible for you to have more forest on your lot, because it's all steep and accessible land, you might want to put the whole lot into carbon, into natives. Whereas if you've got a completely flat pit, you probably don't want to put any of it into natives. So I know people do want to sort of offset the carbon they're producing with the carbon they're storing, but that's not necessarily the right way to go for your own piece of land, because the atmosphere doesn't care whether the carbon is on your land or your neighbours or the guy off in Indonesia.
do you think in time that it may become a marketing ploy where a person can show how sustainable they're being on a farm and their livestock could get a premium as a result?
Yeah, actually, that's
It
it.
might.
There's in Taupo, there's a beef,
Yeah, but that's nothing to do with carbon.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
No, that's right, but it's a different form of income that may come your way.
But it's less than for carbon.
Yep.
It makes a lot of sense for the water quality in Taupo Bay. That's because it is one catchment that has been properly protected. People are pushing in that direction. So Beth and Nan are talking about becoming carbon neutral on a property basis. I think it would be much better for New Zealand to tell a story, or maybe even Taiwan
region.
to tell a story.
Our-
The regional
Our region?
Look at the things we are doing for water, climate, culture, and then market it as
Yeah, let's not
Yeah,
go.
I'm involved in a
Because
project.
if you do it property by property, you get audit.
Oh.
Property by property,
But-
that's massive.
But some property, we've got a huge diversity of land in this district and some highly productive stuff. Some individual farms, it would become a requirement there to be carbon neutral. They just haven't got the land, they haven't got the quality land. So, but over our whole district we could, and that could become a real sales
And
ploy
it's
overseas.
a very nice story to tell, yeah.
I'm
Brand.
involved in a project with a dairy company in the U.S. that's looking at that. It's a cooperative, so they have contracts with all of the folks that they buy the milk from. And across the cooperative there, they have the aspiration of becoming carbon neutral and marketing that milk in that way. And so it doesn't have to be a whole region, it's just the specific farms that they're working with. That's how they want to organize it, and that's exactly what they're aiming for. I haven't heard of that here, but
I think it would be better to say this is our total carbon footprint in, say, 2018, and look how it's fallen. And here's all the stories of great things we're doing, that we're actually
your
doing
story.
it down. Because that's the beautiful thing, is that it's going down, not really where it's at.
Well, I think too, if you look at the sheep industry at the moment, our numbers are used in this country have dropped 20 million, but the number of lambs being killed is about the same. So all of a sudden you've got 20 million less used, and those lambs are only here 3 or 6 months. So that carbon footprint's improved out of sight. And if there was some, like wool is an ongoing commodity, it's replenishable, and there was some premium paid on that, because most of the synthetic products we get out there are coming from fossil fuels. So wool is a far more valuable item, probably 20 years out than it is now.
But that's that story, isn't it, that government needs to somehow get behind as well. They can't just talk about, we want you to buy into our zero carbon bill, these are the standards of water we want you to meet, without actually getting behind growers, the primary production industry.
Ultimately, the only people way to do this is you. So they have to be strategy.
So at any time, is the government going to take into account pest control and what enhancements we get from the likes of controlling possums, compared to how much of our forests are eaten every night?
My understanding of this is that science is still quite research. You need strong science to classify it.
But that's
Possums don't eat vegetables.
They eat the little ones.
Yeah, but there must be a contribution in there over time that
Probably.
that'll be complicated.
The big trees actually have possums eat the little ones because they're the big trees that are in the one of those unfortunate things. I'm on your side.
I just got one other thing to add, and one of the another interesting point with the interviews I was involved with, back in May, is for blocks in forestry. When they get harvested, landowner trustees and other blocks are already starting to think what they do post-harvest. So, given all the context we've talked about, and Māori landowners trying to balance up their aspirations of that, we can go to not us, but they are looking at a per property map or plan, and it might be where there are waterways or roads, they'll look at riparian planting and permanent natives, and the area just off their tracks, they'll look at manuka for easy access for honey and things like that. So they are looking, the landowners are leading the forestry company that they're in partnership with to get quite detailed. They still might have exotics on the area left over, pine trees, but they're starting to mix and match on their property. For carbon, for honey, for oil, for erosion, for infrastructure protection, water quality.
So that was the key part of the council submission of the new changes to the ETS. If you want to get out of plantation and forestry on marginal land, you shouldn't be disadvantaged putting it into something different. And there seems to be quite a lot of appeal to do that.
So if there's any other questions, but that's the frame of our workshop. And you guys are very patient too, hanging out till 5.
That's very good.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.